So this morning's the first Sunday of Advent. Advent is this season, 4 Sundays leading toward Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and all of the remembering, commemorating, celebrating of the birth of Jesus. The first Sunday of Advent, traditionally, historically, throughout the church, has focused into the future, not back. It focuses on some unknown day, some unknown time out ahead when Jesus returns, the second coming of Christ. To get into that, around the world, across the church, there are certain scriptures that are suggested that we read. If you went to St. John's Catholic or St. Luke's Anglican, if you went to almost any church within Burlington, you probably would hear something of these scriptures. Right now I'm going to read just Luke, but as we look through this possibility in my sermon, we're going to read a number of others. Here first, Luke chapter 21. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. I'm going to interrupt myself, or interrupt Jesus. That's Jesus talking. And we're going to unpack that a little bit. But when I start reading again, he is still doing prophecy. However, many of the scholars think that what Luke did was took a number of different times when Jesus made prophetic sayings, like the one I just read, and kind of clumped them all together. So we have to parse them out and discern, is he talking about his century, or is he talking about somewhere far in the future? And that's where the big debate happens, with all of these people who predict they know the end of the world, and it's going to happen next year, and December, when's the Mayan calendar? December 20th? December 12th? Okay.
21st.
21st.
Doesn't matter.
See, no one knows.
It's because we're having a party that night.
All right, let me read the rest of this. This is beginning at verse 25. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. Men will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up, lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Now, the first part that I read sounded pretty scary. This one sounds spectacular. But it ends, your redemption is drawing near. The great mystery. And we're going to think our way through that, and we're going to let Jimmy Stewart help us do it in a few moments. Most of us have been started preparing for Christmas, right? Whether it's shopping or scheduling parties and visits. This afternoon at our house, we're starting to decorate a little bit. We have our daughter home from England until about 4 o'clock, so we're going to put the creche out and a couple lights up while she's around. Of course, I'm nowhere near done getting my presents ready. Actually, I haven't shopped at all. I've thought about it. I have a few ideas. But I know some of you are finished, right? Who's done their shopping? Oh, come on. Anybody? Yeah? Oh, Lori, okay. Well, I commend you, because that's a lot of thinking and preparation. But I know that even when I get my lights up and presents home and hidden, I'm not completely ready. If all I do is shopping and parties and decorating, I'm really missing Christmas. Because Christmas is a message. And in our culture, you can miss the message with all the other things going on. So every year, I hope that we would engage in all the fun, the gifts, the celebrations of the season, and that we'd be receptive and even searching to receive the message of Christmas, renewed in our minds and our spirits as we live forward into the year ahead. Christmas has numerous messages of love, of generosity, of the divine holy presence with us, and more. So what we think through in the planning team is how can we understand in a fresh way the riches of the Christmas story, the whole story, because we read these scriptures year after year. We decided to try this angle on it. The Christmas message is in a lot of movies. And so we're going to look at a different one each week in the month ahead and try and distill out the message from the Christmas story that's carried in the film. Today we begin with the old classic, It's a Wonderful Life. I'm grateful to The Spectator. They must have heard we were doing this. Yesterday's Spec. CBC showed it last night, NBC or CBS, all the broadcasts. I don't know if Linda Lord or somebody got the blog to the networks and let them know that we're doing It's a Wonderful Life, and they supported that. How many of you watched it last night? Oh, really? And did any of you know that I was going to be talking about it this morning? You did? All right, great. Good to do your homework. The movie was made in 1946, right after the Second World War. It was made in black and white, and it actually was a financial failure. The first year it came out, it lost $500,000, which back then was a lot of money. It just didn't click for whatever reason. But over the years, it's more than recouped that because it's shown over and over. People buy the video or the DVD, and it has become kind of a holiday season classic. And many people make it a point every year to watch It's a Wonderful Life again. I confess this is the Christmas movie that can most affect me emotionally. There are a lot of other movies I like, but this one is the one that gets me wiping my eyes or just feeling good. It's the story of George Bailey, who lives in a town called Bedford Falls. George is a straight guy with big dreams. When he's young, as a boy, he's dreaming of what he's going to do. He's going to travel the world and see many things. Then he's going to go to architecture school, and he's going to build towers and bridges and skyscrapers. However, early in the movie, along with hearing his dreams, you also discover something else about George. He always puts the needs of others before himself. And so in a series of events, life-changing events, all his plans get pushed aside. He doesn't get to college because his brother goes. He doesn't get to travel the world because his father dies and he has to take the family business. And then World War II intervenes. And George just continually has to suppress the dreams. He could live with this inner angst, this disappointment, this restlessness. He accepts it and he carries on and he builds a good life until just before Christmas 1946, when a crisis pushes George over the edge and he contemplates suicide because he sees that as the only way out. He's the director of a little building and loan foundation company, what we would call a credit union, I think. And his little business is in constant struggle with the big, powerful bank in town. Well, on Christmas Eve, 1946, his Uncle Billy, who works with him, somehow loses $8,000 of the company money. And it's the day that the bank examiners are there, and the books don't add up, and there's going to be bankruptcy and scandal, and George and his Uncle Billy may be going to prison, and his family will lose everything. And at this point, for George, there seems no way to recover. He's overwhelmed. Not only are his dreams not going to come true, but for George, his life seems to be crashing in on top of him. He has a life insurance policy that's worth $15,000, which, again, in that day was a lot of money. It can pay off all their debt and give his family something to live on. And George realizes he's worth more dead than alive. And so he begins to contemplate suicide as a solution. He ends up in a local restaurant, sitting at the bar, and he cries out to God. Take a look.
Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way. I'm at the end of my rope, and show me the way, oh God.
Eventually, George wanders out of the bar. He's half drunk. He's looking for a way to solve his dilemma. And he ends up on a bridge in the middle of a raging snowstorm. And the waters are turbulent down below, enticing him to end it all. Here's how that worked. Going to do it. And he does end up in the water, but he doesn't jump. He dives in to save someone else, who turns out to be his guardian angel, and the story flows from there. But if we think about George Bailey on that bridge, I think he captures the place many people have been, a place of despair, of hopelessness, darkness, bereft. And when I think about that, I wonder, what would we say to George if we were standing beside him on the bridge there, and he's looking both ways and he's ready to go? What would we say? I've been on the bridge with a few people, folk who thought their life wasn't worth living anymore, that the only way out was to end it. And I never knew exactly what to say. We want to give people a different perspective. We want them to see more than the narrow despair they're in. We want to tell them that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. So hold on. We want to tell someone that whatever they're dealing with, whatever they're facing, it isn't final. They can get through this, and they can find new direction, new perspective. We want to tell them that their life does have purpose and it can go on. It has meaning, and God will be with them and get them through. We want to give them hope and faith. Now notice, for George and for all of us in life, faith is not going to pay the banker back. George actually asks his guardian angel Clarence for $8,000, and Clarence says that's not the way it works. We don't use money up in heaven. And George says, well, it comes in a little handy down here sometimes. But faith and hope produce a new perspective, a new worldview, to trust in God, that God will get us through. God will make a way when there is no way. So hold on to that thought, this idea of a bigger picture, new perspective. We'll come back to it. But I want to look at our scripture passages today and the promise of the second coming of Christ. And I want to read you one in particular that was Jesus right at the end of his time on earth. After he said this is after the resurrection, he's with his disciples outside of Jerusalem. After he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." This is one of the major themes in the New Testament. And in Advent, we look at it, the second coming. The New Testament is full of this theme repeatedly, that Christ has come and went away and will come back. He tells his disciples at the end of John's Gospel, "I go to prepare a place for you, and I will come again." There is a day coming on earth and into history that will change everything, and history will not continue as we know it. This is not a uniquely Christian idea. You need to notice this. I'm not telling you something that's narrow and crazy to our little band of followers of Jesus. Scientists have told us that at some point the earth will collapse into the sun. 100 billion years from now, there will be an end. They see that coming. Environmentalists tell us that the planet cannot continue the way it's going, that the seas are rising, that climate change is now happening, and things may be different in a generation or two, and many species and many humans may be lost. When I was growing up, we lived in fear of global nuclear war. That was what was going to end it all, from all the missiles we had pointed at each other that could annihilate the planet. And now some scientists also say there will be an asteroid that will come from somewhere out there that will strike our planet. It happens every couple 100 million years. So the end of the world is not a uniquely Christian idea. But we have a unique perspective on it. For we believe that whatever does happen to end history, however it comes about, God is ultimately in control and can and will redeem his creation in some way. And Paul and the early Christians actually trusted what the future was bringing. Listen, Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, "We do not want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, for the Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven. Therefore, encourage one another with these words." Now that's interesting. Prophecies and predictions of the end of the world for early Christians were a comfort, an encouragement, because they saw God, the God who loved them in Jesus. They saw God at the end. In today's gospel, it's a little harder to sort out. Jesus is warning his followers that before God's good ending, there is a time coming when life would be almost unbearable. But in the light of his promises, they should look ahead, for he will be returning. This passage of Scripture, the one I read earlier from Luke 21, is called the little apocalypse, the little revelation, because of the kind of language it uses in the description of the end times. What's fascinating is that these do seem like they could happen today. Listen again. "Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near." Anybody remember David Koresh from Waco, Texas? "There will be wars and rumors of wars. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues. There will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven." This sounds like our times. It's easy to understand how some people say, we're living in the last days. Jesus may be returning soon. But of course, like most of the Bible, it is timeless. It speaks to every generation. It does speak to our generation. And it spoke to 100 and 1,000 years ago. So those who say they know when all of this will happen, and you hear of pastors and Bible teachers who take a snippet of Thessalonians and a little bit of Revelation and something from the Gospels, and they stir up a big apocalyptic stew, and they serve it up and say, they get their charts, and here's what's happening, and here's where it's all going to end. They've got it all figured out. No, they don't. Jesus himself said, no one knows, only the Father in heaven. Jesus did not know when the final end would come. But in the passage that I read to you earlier, Luke chapter 21, that was triggered by a visit to the temple in Jerusalem. And you have to have seen to understand the awe that the disciples were feeling and the permanence that they thought was standing before them. The temple was massive, one of the greatest structures of that ancient world. There were stones that were 20 meters long, single quarried limestone, 20 meters. And they were stacked and built into this great temple. There's a bit of the wall left there now. They call it the Wailing Wall. Massive stones. And there was huge doors as big as that, not our little doors, as big as the doors as our stained glass window, of bronze and gold coating. And so the disciples, when they walk out of this structure that has marble and tapestries that have been donated by kings and emperors from around the world, sent into Jerusalem, and the disciples say, Lord, what a structure. Wow. And Jesus says, you see this temple? It's not permanent. Nothing in this world is permanent. Only God and God's kingdom is permanent. I added a little bit there. What Jesus actually says, the day is coming when not one stone will be left. And they say, when, Lord, when? Have a peek if you have this. I put a lot of it right here. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, as for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another, all will be thrown down. They asked him, Teacher, when will this be? What will be the sign? But this is about to take place. And he said, beware that you are led astray, for many will come in my name and say, I am he. The time is near. I just read that to you. Nation will rise up against nation. Various places, famines and plagues. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation has come near. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those inside the city must leave it. And it all happened a generation later. The Jewish historian Josephus records what happened between 66 and 70 AD. There was a little rebellion, and the Jewish rebels were successful. They overthrew a couple of Roman garrisons, had temporary success, but when the word got back to Rome, they sent legions. And the armies just swept in through Turkey and down through Syria and Damascus and just crushed. Josephus records that 1 million Jews were slaughtered and 97,000 were taken off as slaves back to Rome, back to the great Roman cities as slaves, never to return. So Jesus seemed to know and foresee and anticipate his own century, what was happening. And gospel writers may have scrunched that together with some of his sayings about the end, the very great conclusion. Again, I go back to the bulletin cover. Near the bottom, there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations. People will faint from fear and foreboding. I'm fast forwarding through here. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Your redemption is drawing near. That was the promise. That when the whole universe seemed to be collapsing, when your life and your world seemed to be over, stand up, raise your heads, for God is coming. Your redemption is drawing near. And so Luke finally returns to this word. Be on your guard, so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day catch you unexpectedly. I read those words and I think that's George Bailey. When he's out there on the bridge, about to jump, his heart is weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life. But thanks be to God, in the movie, George gets a new perspective on life. His worldview is changed and opens up. Clarence, the guardian angel, shows him that his life has been of tremendous value, that he matters to people, that he's made a difference, and it would be wrong to throw it all away. Today's scriptures tell us that we're not to be weighed down as George Bailey was. We're to have this big picture perspective on life, on history. This world is not all there is. That's part of the Christmas message. God has a plan for history. And Jesus has been here and is gone, but is coming back. Maybe soon, and maybe not for 1,000 years. God has a plan for each one of us. And we won't always get it right all the way through. It won't always go smoothly for any of us. But Jesus says, be not afraid. In this world you will have trouble, but I have overcome the world. Lo, I am with you always, even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You need fear nothing, for I am with you. When you have this right perspective, when you truly know the final outcome for this world and its history and for your existence, when you know how it all ends, then it truly is a wonderful life. Amen.